Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho, and it's Saturday, week 6. Time for the injury report. We're going to mention every player out or questionable across the league. We're going to mix it up a little bit this time. Maybe I'll stick with it. Maybe I'll change it, go back to the original. But instead of in alphabetical order, we will just go with every single game, mention both offense and defense and O-line in the same breath. So we will begin in Arizona, coincidentally still alphabetical, but Kyler Murray is our first player who is questionable with a foot injury. Did not practice Wednesday or Thursday, but then was limited on Friday. He is a game time decision against the Colts, and I would deem it more likely that he suits up, but still not a lock. If I had to guess, it's like 65-35 in favor of him playing. So it's possible he sits out. If he does, I honestly don't think it moves the needle that much for the offensive weapons. Jacoby Brissett is the backup, and some of those scrambles that Kyler does otherwise will turn into pass attempts, and I kind of don't feel like the offense is good enough with Kyler to feel like it's a major drop-off. So perhaps they really suck. Maybe I'm underestimating how bad Jacoby Brissett is, but in my opinion, it doesn't change my opinion very much on Marvin Harrison Jr. or Trey McBride. I still think they'll get the ball heavily, given there's a lack of other weapons. James Conner's on IR, so is Trey Benson, and I believe Michael Carter is clearly the guy, especially after DeMercado's fumble. It's not like DeMercado was getting much volume in the first place. So start Michael Carter this week, start your typical Arizona Cardinals, but Kyler, probably not a safe start in your lineup. Zay Jones, the backup wide receiver, is questionable as well with a knee injury, but he was limited all week in practice. I think he'll play. It does not move the needle. He's kind of irrelevant for fantasy. On their defense, the Arizona defensive line is still without Darius Robinson and Walter Nolan. Walter Nolan has yet to play. He's their first round pick, but Robinson has missed a game or two. So that's unfortunate. Linebacker Mac Wilson is questionable, and then their cornerback Max Melton is questionable as well, but he's been questionable for like 3 weeks in a row. I think he will play. I think he's all right. On the Colts side of the ball in this matchup, running back Tyler Goodson is out, and perhaps the backup DJ Giddens gets an extra few targets. However, wide receiver Alec Pierce has cleared the concussion protocol. He's missed the last 2 games, and because he's active, I'm not sure I believe that Josh Downs is as safe anymore. Alec Pierce was better in fantasy before he went down than Josh Downs. So I only trust Michael Pittman in general, but their kicker Spencer Schrader was placed on IR. They are starting Michael Badgley up from the practice squad. So that is a kicker situation you may need to change, but odds are you've already sorted it out. Their defense and offensive line is pretty healthy. In another matchup, the Ravens and the Rams, Lamar Jackson is out as expected. They have a bye next week, but I think he will return after the bye week. So Cooper Rush gets the start for the second week in a row. The Baltimore offense gets an overall downgrade because of that. And the Rams defense is a safer start against Cooper Rush. But Zay Flowers, their number 1 wide receiver, is questionable with a shoulder injury, and he was limited all week in practice. He's been somewhat safe to play this season, only 1 bad bust game, but last week with Cooper Rush, he still offered 70+ yards. So maybe you can trust his floor even against the Rams. It's not a bad matchup, but he's a game time decision. I expect him to play, but not as safe of a start, knowing he may not be 100% and maybe leaves early if the shoulder is aggravated. So in general, I don't think it changes much. You're not really trusting the Ravens offense this week, but perhaps Rashad Bateman and DeAndre Hopkins get a few extra targets if Flowers is inactive. The Ravens defense is getting slightly more healthy. However, linebacker Roquan Smith is still out. So is cornerback Chidobe Awuzie, but free safety Kyle Hamilton and cornerback Marlon Humphrey are both active for this game. They did not suit up against the Texans, and maybe their defense is a little less vulnerable against the pass, but I would still start Stafford. Stafford's going to torch the inept Ravens defense. In LA, tight end Tyler Higbee is active. He missed last week against the Niners. So unfortunately, Terrence Ferguson is not going to get a shot to run most of the routes. I still don't trust any tight end in LA. But Tutu Atwell, the number 3 wide receiver, is questionable with a hamstring injury, and it cropped up in practice on Thursday. So he was full Wednesday, limited Thursday, Friday. I think he'll play, but he's not 100%. If he does not suit up, he is a game time call. Jordan Whittington would get extra routes. But down the field, it's all or nothing. If you don't get that 70-yard touchdown, it's pretty punitive to start a Rams backup wide receiver. Their offensive line, though, is without right tackle Rob Havenstein. He is doubtful for this game, so not expecting him. And then their linebacker Omar Spites is doubtful as well. The Rams defense otherwise is healthy. In Carolina, running back Chuba Hubbard will miss his second game in a row. He missed last week. Rico Dowdle was phenomenal. And Chuba's not even close to coming back. He did not practice at all. I don't know if he'll be back anytime soon. But wide receiver Jalen Coker has been on IR since the beginning of the season. The day after they traded away Adam Thielen, Coker got hurt. And even though he logged a full week in practice, he remains on IR. He was not activated by 1 p.m. Pacific time, and that means he will remain on IR for another week. His window to practice was opened last week, so he would return probably week 7. So unfortunately, Coker does not get to exploit this matchup. Xavier Legette and Tet McMillan get a slight bump in value, with Coker staying on IR. Tight end Jatavian Sanders is expected to play, though. He's questionable with an ankle injury, and he missed the last 2 games, but he was limited Wednesday, full on Thursday, and then back to limited on Friday. He's still a game time call, but I think he'll be back on the field. That full practice on Thursday is a very good sign, but it wasn't enough for Coker to suit up, so if he doesn't play, Tommy Tremble will get the routes, but last week Tremble was terrible, so I'm not going to trust him. Unfortunately, Bryce Young does not get the biggest upgrade you're hoping for. Against Dallas, usually it's a must start for opposing quarterbacks, but I do not trust Bryce Young. He had a great matchup last week and did nothing with it. So that's sad for Jalen Coker. I saw some upside for him in this game. In general, though, I think the breakout for Tet McMillan is more likely. Their offensive line in Carolina is without right tackle Taylor Morton. He has been ruled out. On Dallas's side of the ball, it's the second week in a row without Kevontae Turpin, number 3 wide receiver. He's out, so Ryan Flournoy stepped up last week. If Jalen Tolbert shits the bed again, then Flournoy could get some extra value. J.C. Horn will be lined up opposite George Pickens. So somebody other than Jake Ferguson and Pickens has to step up. It can't all just go to Javonte. Last week, Flournoy had over 100 yards, 6 catches, on 9 targets. It's possible he is legit, but next week CeeDee Lamb comes back. I'm not quite sure I want to trust rostering Ryan Flournoy, but Lamb remains out. He did not practice at all this week, and I'm hopeful he returns for the division game in week 7 against the Commanders, but that is not a guarantee. So maybe he'll be out until week 8. He has missed 3 games since going down. Running back Miles Sanders is out again, so Jaden Blue is Javonte's backup again, but Javonte is a workhorse. I have no interest in starting Jaden Blue. The Cowboys' offensive line was without 3 starters last week, and some of them are getting healthy. They're still without right guard Tyler Booker. The rookie is out once again. But left guard Tyler Smith is questionable. He's more likely to play after missing last week. And then their left tackle Tyler Guyton is active. So only 1 game out for him. That is a good sign for the Cowboys offense. On the defensive side of the ball, they're still without linebacker Demarion Overshone and their linebacker Sanborn. Both players are out, but their cornerback situation is getting banged up. Deron Bland is questionable, and so is Trayvon Diggs. So their secondary's been trash this year. If you're telling me both Bland and Diggs sit, I think Tet McMillan is a must start. Tet should have a big breakout, especially with Coker not activated off IR. In the Bengals-Packers game, we all know Joe Burrow is on IR. They traded for Joe Flacco, and he's expected to get the start. No downtime for Flacco. They did bench Jake Browning. So perhaps that helps the receiving core, but in my opinion, it doesn't move the needle. They're still very likely to lose. But Jamar Chase is dealing with an illness on Friday. He was listed as questionable, but I'm not worried about it. I expect him to suit up on Sunday. He should be active, but there is a slight chance he doesn't suit up. On their defense, Shamar Stewart is getting a little healthier, but still unlikely to suit up. He's been out for a while. He was upgraded to doubtful. I am not expecting him to suit up. For the Packers, their wide receiver Christian Watson has started to practice. He was limited all week, but he is not going to play. He has been ruled out with that knee injury for week 6. So they opened his 21-day window to start practicing. It's possible he plays next week at Arizona, but in my opinion, it's much more likely he suits up at the Steelers game in week 8. I think the revenge game against Aaron Rodgers is more likely his debut, but maybe he's back next week. Perhaps I'm too pessimistic on Christian Watson, but Jayden Reed remains on IR. The earliest he could return is also week 8, but it's also possibly closer to week 10. And for now, there's no real update on Jayden Reed. But Marshawn Lloyd, the running back that's always been injured, remains on IR. There is also no update for him. And kicker Brandon McManus is dealing with a right quad injury. He was limited all week in practice, but he's questionable. Not too worried about it. I expect McManus to play. So if he's your kicker, I'd be fine starting him, but there's plenty of available kickers that are fine to pivot to as well. Maybe you'd rather move off of McManus with a quad injury. The Packers offensive line is a bit banged up. There are 3 players that are all questionable. Their left tackle, Walker, their left guard, Banks, and their right tackle, Tom. All of them are questionable. I expect them to play, but they have missed some games earlier this season. Their defensive tackle, Devontae Wyatt, is out, but in general, their defense otherwise is fully healthy. In Denver, there's only one player to mention. It's their left guard, Ben Powers, who is out. Otherwise, the Broncos' offense and defense is like the picture of health across the league. Let's hope it stays that way. The Broncos remain healthy. The Jets side of the ball in that London matchup, running back Braylon Allen was placed on IR last week, so Isaiah Davis has some extra value, but wide receiver Allen Lazard is out. That does not move the needle. I'm not starting a number 2 Jets receiver. I'm still reluctant to trust Garrett Wilson against Pat Surtain. For their defense, nickelback Michael Carter is out, so perhaps if he was going to line up against Evan Ingram, that could help Evan Ingram. And then cornerback Stevens is questionable. I think he'll play, but it's not a guarantee. Their secondary is banged up beyond Sauce Gardner. When it comes to the Browns-Steelers game, the Browns are without Cedric Tillman. He's been on IR since last week, and it looks like David Njoku was really the main benefactor with him out. So I love this matchup for Njoku. The Steelers give up the most fantasy points to the tight end position. I think Njoku is a legit top 10 play against Pittsburgh, but perhaps Harold Fannin also gets the benefit. I prefer Njoku, but I think the backup Fannin is also pretty relevant. Without Tillman, there's only Judy that runs routes consistently. Isaiah Bond was kind of a no-show in week 5. On their defense, though, defensive tackle Mike Hall Jr. is out. Otherwise, they're pretty healthy. For the Steelers in Pittsburgh, Calvin Austin, number 2 wide receiver, is out with a shoulder injury. He did not practice at all this week. So Roman Wilson got extra reps all throughout the bye and during week 6. I think Roman Wilson will be running a lot more routes this week. There is a chance he earns some extra playing time. But I think in general, the players benefiting the most would be Pat Freiermuth and Jonnu Smith. It's not like Calvin Austin was getting a shit ton of volume in the first place, so maybe 1 or 2 extra targets go elsewhere. But in general, Roman Wilson will get the main boost in value running extra routes in the offense. But in the backfield, Jaylen Warren is active. He missed week 4 in Dublin, and then off the bye, he did practice in full all week long. So Kenny Gainwell is not the guy, but Gainwell probably earned a little more extra work, so maybe it's more of a committee this week. I still think Warren is the guy you want, but the reason I would be benching him or just flexing him is because the Browns defense is elite at stopping opposing running backs. It's not a good matchup for Jaylen Warren. So buyer beware. He is active and healthy, but not the best upside against the Browns. In the Jags-Seahawks game for the Jaguars, Brenton Strange was placed on IR earlier this week, so I'm not expecting him back anytime soon with a quad injury. His earliest return would be week 11. He's expected to miss at least 5 weeks, and that includes their bye week. So 4 games, Brenton Strange will be out, and that does mean Hunter Long will get the added rotational snaps at tight end. Hunter Long has not been productive, though. Only 8 targets, 7 catches. 2 of them have been touchdowns, but through 5 games, that's pretty bogus. So I do not trust Hunter Long. We'll see what happens, but in my opinion, it opens the door for Brian Thomas Jr., Travis Hunter, and maybe De'Ami Brown, Parker Washington to get some added reps. I see more volume going to the receivers. But this Seahawks matchup was very good against the tight end position. Perhaps it is neutral overall. The Jags' offensive line, however, is without their center, Robert Hainsley. He is doubtful for week 6. On the Seahawks side of the ball, their offense is fully healthy, so that's good news, but their offensive line is without right tackle Josh Jones. I still think Kenneth Walker is like a high-end flex option, barely top 20, because Charbonnet keeps vulturing him. On the defensive side of the ball for Seattle, though, it is very banged up. Their secondary is depleted. They're without Reek Woolen, their best corner, and Devon Witherspoon, also a very talented option in the secondary. Their safety, Julian Love, is also doubtful. All three of them are very unlikely to play, and that does mean Brian Thomas Jr. and Travis Hunter are a bit safer. I did upgrade BTJ in my rankings. I think Thomas is a good start with the injuries for the Seahawks defense. Their linebacker, Derek Hall, is also out, so perhaps in general with the injuries on defense, Trevor Lawrence is a little bit safer. I think his passing efficiency will be much better. In LA for the Chargers, running back Omarion Hampton was placed on IR. He will miss a minimum of 4 weeks with an ankle injury. I was at that game. He was in the tent for quite a while. So I don't know if he'll even be back 5 weeks from now. I don't know how long Hampton will be gone. So maybe you're going to trust Kimani Vidal or Hassan Haskins. Haskins has experience dating back to Michigan with Harbaugh, so I think he'll be involved, but I prefer Kimani Vidal, especially in terms of passing down usage. Hampton was getting a lot of targets, and that I think will go to Kimani Vidal. He's more athletic. I prefer him from an upside standpoint. The Dolphins matchup is one of the best. So this week, it'll be a question mark. Who's the guy? I would put my eggs in the Vidal basket, but I wouldn't completely overrule Haskins being the guy you need. It's still a big question mark in that backfield with Najee on IR. But Quentin Johnston, the wide receiver, is questionable with a hamstring injury. He was limited all week, so game time decision. They're not sounding too pessimistic, so I do expect him to play, but it's not a guarantee. If he does miss, then Ladd McConkey and Keenan Allen get a major upgrade. They'd be much safer options. And maybe Trey Harris or KLS will get 1 or 2 extra targets down the field. But I wouldn't start them. I would only trust Ladd and Keenan. On the offensive line, Joe Alt remains out, and their right tackle Trey Pipkins is also out. So Justin Herbert will have very little time to throw the ball. The pocket awareness will be key. I'm not too excited about Herbert this week. Even though the matchup is good, I'm not excited about their offensive output against Miami. I think the Dolphins defense is actually somewhat legit as a start this week with a lot of weird options elsewhere. But on the defensive line, defensive end Deshaun Hand is out. Linebacker Bud Dupree is questionable. And it's the 4th game where linebacker Khalil Mack is still on IR. So maybe he returns next week, but I'm not so sure. He did break his arm, and that may take longer than 4 weeks. So maybe he returns next week. But on the Dolphins side of the ball, they're without Tyreek Hill. We all knew that. But otherwise, their offense is healthy. Except on the offensive line, their center Aaron Brewer is questionable, not a guarantee to suit up, but not a huge deal. I wouldn't downgrade A-Chain at all. In Las Vegas, Brock Bowers is out for the 2nd week in a row. He did not practice at all this week. So Michael Mayer has some opportunity. He is active. He missed last week with a concussion, but he has been cleared to play. He is active. He will get the start at tight end. So maybe you're willing to take a swing on Mayer, but I think the waiver wire at tight end is actually kind of deep, so odds are I would keep him on the wire. Assuming Bowers comes back next week, there's not any long-term value for Michael Mayer. But their defense is healthy, so is their offensive line. And on the Titans side of the ball, kicker Joey Sly has been ruled out. So they did promote Matthew Wright from the practice squad. He is the kicker in Tennessee, and they have kicked a lot of field goals. They have not converted many touchdowns for the Titans offense. The offensive line is probably getting back right tackle J.C. Latham, though. He's missed a couple games now and is questionable, so that is moving in the right direction, but may still miss week 6. And then on defense, their linebacker Arden Key is out. Otherwise, the Titans defense is healthy. In New England, the Saints-Patriots game, we all know that Antonio Gibson went down last week with a knee injury. He is on IR for the rest of the season. So Travion Henderson at least is the number 2 on the depth chart. If Ramondre does fumble and goes in the doghouse, then Henderson will get all the work. We don't have to worry about Gibson factoring in. But I still think Ramondre has retained this job for whatever reason. They are committed to him despite his 3 fumbles this year, and that's annoying, but it is what it is. On the defensive side of the ball, cornerback Christian Watson is questionable. He is expected to play, however. He missed practice this week, and it sounds like it was just maintenance related, given he was injured earlier in the year. It sounds like they planned for him to rest, and Gonzalez will suit up. So if he does miss, Olave is a safer bet, but with Gonzalez expected to play, I don't feel like Olave is going to change anything from what he's given you this year. Like 8-9 points is the expectation for Olave. But their safety, Jalen Hawkins, is out, so perhaps deep down the field, Shaheed could bust one open. Shaheed is still a risky start, but maybe he gains some value. On the Saints side of the ball, Alvin Kamara is questionable with an ankle injury, and he was limited all week in practice. He actually got hurt in week 5. That was the reason why Kendry Miller saw a ton of snaps late in the game. It wasn't just because they were winning, and it does open the door for Kendry Miller to get even more volume in week 6. I also see a potential trade incoming for Kamara. The deadline is approaching in week 9, and he is 30 years old. They're 1-4. It doesn't feel like they would rule out a trade for Kamara if someone else was interested. So maybe the Chargers are interested if Vidal and Haskins can't step up. We'll see what happens, but Kamara is questionable. With that trade situation, they might limit his snaps yet again. On the defensive side of the ball, nickelback Isaac Yiadom is out, and sometimes nickels cover tight ends, so perhaps Hunter Henry is a safer start. The Saints are a good matchup for opposing tight ends. Juwan Johnson is also active. He was questionable early in the week, but full in practice on Friday. Juwan Johnson gets a good matchup. He will play against the Patriots. In the Niners-Bucks game, Brock Purdy, the quarterback, is out. And even though Mac Jones is questionable with a knee and oblique injury, all the reports are saying he is expected to suit up. They are assuming Mac Jones to be the starter. And he's undefeated. I don't think the offense gets any worse with Mac Jones. I actually think they're still pretty legit with the backup. So Mac Jones has been earning a contract. I think he will be a starter next year. I think the Niners will be fine with Mac Jones yet again. But George Kittle remains on IR. They're hopeful he comes back next week, but not in week 6. So Jake Tonjes will run the routes. And then Brandon Ayuk remains out until at least week 8 or 9. Ricky Pearsall is out as well. I was more optimistic about Pearsall earlier in the week being available, but that's not the case. In actuality, Juwan Jennings is more likely to play. He's questionable with that ankle injury, and although he did not practice Wednesday, he was limited on both Thursday and Friday. Juwan Jennings is a game-time decision, and although I think it's 50-50, he may not suit up, it's not a bad bet to make. He should be in the lineup. If he is active, I would start Juwan. We saw Kendrick Bourne blow up. And even earlier in the season, when Juwan was active with Mac Jones, he also had a great game. I believe it was week 2 or week 3 after he came back from an injury. I think it was week 3. Juwan played well. So as long as he's on the field, I would start Juwan Jennings, especially without Ricky Pearsall. That is a pretty safe bet for 10-plus targets. Last week, Kendrick Bourne and Tonjes both had 11 targets. So if neither receiver plays, then upgrade both Bourne and Tonjes, but Juwan Jennings would be a must start with no Ricky Pearsall if active. On the defensive side of the ball, we all know Nick Bosa is on IR for the rest of the season, and defensive tackle Kevin Givens is out. So is safety Malik Mustafa. Their defense is somewhat banged up, but not too bad other than Bosa. In Tampa Bay, Bucky Irving remains out. He did not practice at all this week with a shoulder injury, so Rachaad White is a must start. Maybe not as much as upside as last week, but still very productive. Got to start the Bucks RB1. And then Mike Evans remains out. It's his 3rd game missed. Last year with a hamstring, he also missed 3 games, so maybe he returns next week, but that's not a lock. And then Chris Godwin, he played the last 2 weeks, but is now out with a fibula. He did not practice at all this week, so he did aggravate that leg injury. Not good for Chris Godwin. We knew he wouldn't be 100% of what he was last year, and he's not going to suit up. So that does mean Egbuka is a lock in the lineup, guaranteed even more targets. But Sterling Shepard is going to be a consistent weapon for Baker this week, and Baker's playing so well. I do think Shepard has legit flex appeal. And then Cade Otton really stepped up in a good matchup last week. It could happen again, but he had been terrible before that point, and there were games when Godwin was missing. I think Otton's a bit matchup dependent, but still the volume should be a little more available for Otton with Godwin off the field. But Jalen McMillan has no update. He remains on IR, expected to be out until at least the second half of the year. On defense, cornerback Zion McCollum is out, and perhaps that does help Juwan Jennings a little bit. But in the Lions-Chiefs game, now we're in prime time, left tackle Taylor Decker is out, and Khalif Raymond, the wide receiver, is questionable. If he doesn't play, Isaac Tesla will run some extra routes, but probably not enough to move the needle. If anything, Jamison Williams might be a little safer as a flyer in the flex. But on defense, that's mainly where the Lions are banged up. Cornerback Terrion Arnold has been ruled out. Cornerback Avonte Maddox has also been ruled out. And then their safeties, Brian Branch and Kirby Joseph, are both questionable. They are not a lock to play. And in general, those are really important players for the Lions defense. So I really trust Mahomes. He's my QB2 this week. If none of those players suit up, if the safeties aren't active, then Xavier Worthy should torch them. I think Tyquan Thornton also has very high upside against the Lions defense. I like the Chiefs passing game to have some upside. On the Chiefs side of the ball, it's the last week where Rashee Rice is suspended. It is the 6th game of the year. So next week in week 7, he will return. He will play against the Raiders. But earlier in the week, Xavier Worthy did miss practice on Thursday, but according to Andy Reid, that was scheduled rest because of his earlier injuries in the season, and he was back on Friday. He was full both Wednesday and Friday. So Xavier Worthy's active off the injury report. He will crush against the Lions with their injuries. And just last week, we saw Jamar Chase blow up against them. I think Worthy is a must-start, a top 10 option, in my opinion, against Detroit. All of the offensive line and defensive starters are healthy in Kansas City, so that is positive news for them. They are much healthier than the Lions in this matchup. But on Monday, we have 2 primetime games, and for the Falcons going against Buffalo, wide receiver Darnell Mooney is out. He had a hamstring injury that forced him out early in week 4, and then off the bye they were hopeful he'd be okay, but he did not practice at all this week. So Mooney might be out for a while. I did drop him to pick up Jalen Coker, but even Coker is not going to suit up. So in one of my leagues, that's pretty irrelevant for me, but London and Kyle Pitts are going to see added volume. There's a chance that Ray McLeod gets some of those targets, but in week 1, when Mooney was out as well, Casey Washington did get the bump. He was the next man up. He ran almost 90% of the snaps when Mooney was inactive. So maybe you'll feel more confident in Pitts, but in general, I just really trust London to get double-digit targets without Darnell Mooney. They will run the ball a little extra, and I don't think I trust Michael Penix Jr. in my lineup. That's unfortunate, but Pitts feels like a safer play. And then on defense, nickelback Billy Bowman is questionable, may not suit up, but that's it on defense. For the Bills, tight end Dalton Kincaid is questionable, limited all week with a oblique strain, and on Wednesday he was wearing a non-contact jersey, so I think he'll be fine. He's a game time decision. It's a Monday night game, so that's not ideal. If you have to pivot elsewhere, your options would be Kyle Pitts, Zach Ertz, or choosing between Colston Loveland and Cole Kmet. That's a big gamble, so perhaps you might just settle for Dawson Knox, but I think Kyle Pitts would be the best backup option to roster if Kincaid doesn't play. But I think he'll suit up. If he doesn't, the wide receivers I think would get the major upgrade, not Dawson Knox. On defense, Matt Milano, the linebacker, is out. He's missed some time, but has came back. He did get hurt again. He's not going to suit up. Last game of the week, Chicago at the Commanders. Colston Loveland, rookie tight end, who did miss week 4 with a hip injury, was limited on Thursday, Friday. On Saturday, he was full in practice. So on Monday, he's going to play. Expect Loveland to be a bit more involved. Kmet did not look good in week 4. He benefit a bit from Loveland's absence, but off the bye, I think the rookie first-round pick probably gets a few more routes and might be more involved. Watch out for him and Luther Burden. Rookies off the bye usually get a bit more established in the offense. So that's an interesting situation to monitor, but I'm not going to start a Bears tight end. And then their kicker, Cairo Santos, is questionable, but was full all week in practice. I do expect Santos to be active. So if he's your kicker, you can still trust him. And then on the defensive side of the ball, defensive tackle Grady Jarrett has been ruled out for the Bears. And then cornerback Jalen Johnson remains on IR. He's their best player, so you don't worry about the matchup for Deebo Samuel. For the Commanders, Terry McLaurin remains out yet again, missing his 3rd straight game, and that quad injury did not allow him to practice at all this week. So with Noah Brown also out, some of the backups do get extra reps, but last week it didn't matter. Other than a 50-yard catch by Luke McCaffrey, it was the Deebo Samuel show. Even Zach Ertz put up a bagel against the Chargers. So I would only be starting Deebo, but his heel injury is still nagging at him. He's questionable, limited all week in practice, and one of those days was a walkthrough. Technically, he did not practice one of those days, but he's a game time call. It's a Monday night game, and if he doesn't suit up, I don't know who else you would pivot to. I think you'd probably have to go to DJ Moore for the Bears. It's the last game of the week, so good luck there. Maybe it'd be the flex decision, and you could maybe go JCM or Zach Ertz, but if it's not JCM, I don't see who you're starting at wide receiver other than DJ Moore. So that's a rough situation. I expect Deebo to play. If I had to put a gauge on it, it's like 70-30. He will suit up, but last week he played through it. It's possible it will get worse over time. Lastly, running back Chris Rodriguez is questionable, not expecting him to play with a calf injury. He did not practice all week long, and he is the backup to JCM, so McNichols will get a few extra touches, but in general, that just locks in Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt to your lineup. The matchup's amazing against Chicago. I would definitely start JCM. I ranked him top 15 in week 6. So that is it for the injury updates. Now let me update all of my rankings, and it running back, I made very few changes. I decided to bump up Breece Hall 2 spots because I remembered in the past, Breece Hall has dominated the Broncos. In his rookie season, in his first game against Denver, he had a house call touchdown on only 4 touches. He had 72 yards and a touchdown. Then he tore his ACL and he only played 12 snaps. But he had over 13 points in just 4 touches against Denver. He has played very well against them in his career. And then the following season, as a sophomore in the league, he did crush them. 22 touches, 177 yards, 1 touchdown, 3 catches, another 17 yards. He had 27 fantasy points in his second year against the Broncos. He has 2 50-plus yard house calls on Denver. But his third game against them, only 4 rushing yards on 10 carries, another 14 yards receiving, no touchdown. He had less than 3 points in his third game. So this will be his 4th career game versus Denver, and he is averaging 14 plus points on average in his career. I could see another house call in London. You know they're going to have to look elsewhere than Garrett Wilson on Pat Surtain. So I do think Breece Hall has some major explosiveness. He's averaging over 100 yards from scrimmage every week. And the only problem for him in fantasy this year has been the lack of touchdowns. So maybe the house call leads to an end zone touchdown. And on Tuesday, I ranked him 18. I bumped him up 2 spots. Now he's my RB 16, but still in the same tier. I'd still rather go Rico Dowdle or Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt over Breece Hall. But he is the only player I changed in the top 20. So unless you have Travis Etienne or J.K. Dobbins, those are the only 2 players that I would be benching in exchange for Breece Hall that I would not have done back on Tuesday. Breece only moves up 2 spots, jumps Etienne and J.K. Dobbins. Other than that, the only other player moving down the list would be Alvin Kamara with his questionable tag and limited practice sessions. I am worried that they keep him healthy, trying to get someone to trade for him. And I do think Kendry Miller will get a few more extra touches in the run game. So I lowered Kamara by 6 spots. It's a bad matchup against the Patriots, and I've already been low on him this season because he's questionable. He is not a safe play. He is below the tier break. I would 100% bench Alvin Kamara. No longer inside my top 30. So he moved down 6 spots overall. I bumped up Kendry Miller 2 spots right behind him. And although I still think Kamara has more value, it's only because he catches passes, and Kendry does not do that anywhere near at the same rate. So Kendry might get the touchdown, might get more volume, but Kamara might have more yardage and catches. Overall, I'd be benching both Saints running backs, but I would definitely be stashing Kendry Miller for the rest of the season. I think he could get the job after the trade deadline. Otherwise, I did not change a single thing at running back, so very few changes. Overall, the only major difference would be at wide receiver, where I changed a lot. I removed Ricky Pearsall. He was previously ranked in the top 20, so you can't start him. He's out. I also ranked Terry as a good flex play. He's out as well. And then outside the top 40, I did have Darnell Mooney, Chris Godwin, and Calvin Austin all in my top 50, but none of them are going to play. They are all out, so all 5 of those receivers have been taken off of the list. So in the top 11, I'm tempted to downgrade Deebo Samuel because he's questionable, but I do think he'll play. And with Terry out, he's just a lock in the lineup. I'm a little worried about his health, but as long as he's active, you have to start Deebo. Against Chicago, it's a good matchup, and there are no other targets to threaten him. It's only the Deebo and JCM show in Washington. Zach Ertz has been losing some value. So Deebo still in my top 11, still in the must-start tier, and there's no way you're benching him as long as he plays on Monday night. But in the top 20, I did upgrade Juwan Jennings. I basically swapped him in the rankings with Ricky Pearsall, who I previously had at number 18, and Juwan Jennings does move up 17 overall spots. I think he plays. If he does, he's a top 20 option. Last week, Kendrick Bourne fucking crushed. So the Niners' number 1 receiver is a player you want to start. As long as Juwan will suit up, he will have a good game with Mac Jones against the Bucks. They are without Zion McCollum in the secondary. But I also upgraded Brian Thomas Jr. by 5 spots as well because of the injuries in Seattle's secondary. Pretty much every major matchup I'm worried about is not on the field. Reek Woolen is doubtful, so is Devon Witherspoon, and so is free safety Julian Love. I think Brian Thomas Jr. will have a much better game, especially with Brenton Strange on IR. So I also upgraded Trevor Lawrence. I'll get to him later in the video, but I think Brian Thomas is a top 20 play. I would start him. He looked better last week, and that was against the Chiefs. This matchup should be better, should be easier on paper with the injuries in Seattle. I downgraded Marvin Harrison Jr., though, 3 spots overall, because if Kyler doesn't play, I don't think Jacoby Brissett is as good. So I still think Harrison has a good game. I would still start him. He's in my top 20, but I just worry a little bit about Brissett. The Colts defense can definitely shut you down, but Brissett would get a revenge game. I still think Marvin Harrison Jr. in his dad's hometown would have a good game. I think there is some motivation to give Harrison a touchdown. I like Marv as a top 20 play in week 6, but I stayed put on Michael Pittman. I also stayed put on Ladd, but I did swap Keenan Allen and Quentin Johnson. If QJ does not play, he's not going to be in the lineup, so definitely monitor his status. But because he's not a lock to suit up, I'd rather just go Keenan Allen if I was deciding between the 3. So I still have Ladd, Keenan, and QJ back to back to back. All 3 are in my top 25. So I am telling you to start all 3 Chargers receivers. The Dolphins matchup is so bad, and I still think Herbert will be productive. But my preference this week is Ladd McConkey. QJ let you down with the fumble last week. It's possible he lets you down again. He might not even be available, might not be healthy on Sunday. So make sure he suits up. If you're counting on him, that is very important. But I did upgrade Romeo Doubs by 6 spots in my top 30. I told you Matthew Golden is a player I think will break out this week, but the argument is not rooted in like a guaranteed bet. If anything, Romeo Doubs is the player to bet on in the Packers receiving core. So until Watson and Reed come back, I do want to be starting at least one Packers receiver. And in general, that should be Romeo Doubs. He runs all the routes. He has good chemistry with Love. He scores touchdowns. I think he's a top 30 option. I think behind Chris Olave, I'd rather go Romeo Doubs than Jamison Williams and Garrett Wilson. I think Doubs has some upside. But if Golden does have that breakout like I'm expecting, I would be worried about it. There is some risk involved. Similar to JMO, you could get burned. But I would still hold strong on Golden. I still think Golden has the better game. I ranked him top 25. And Kraft has a good matchup. It's possible one of these Packers wideouts does burn you. But against the Bengals, you'd expect a lot of points on offense. So there should be enough to go around. I think Romeo Doubs is a top 30 option. And Matthew Golden is top 24. I did downgrade Zay Flowers, however, by 4 spots in the rankings. He is questionable, not a guarantee to play. And with Cooper Rush, you just can't feel too excited about the Ravens passing game. So I am less willing to start Zay Flowers with the injury. I bumped him below JMO, Garrett Wilson, and Jacoby Myers. 4 spots overall isn't that much, but it is below the tier break. I would rather bench Zay Flowers the week before the bye. But a few spots lower, I did upgrade Travis Hunter because of the injuries to the secondary in Seattle, especially with Brenton Strange out. I think both BTJ and Hunter are a bit safer, but Hunter has not shown enough. Last week was encouraging though, so I would still be rostering him. And at some point, I do expect a breakout from Travis Hunter. So maybe it happens this week, but I don't know if I fully believe he has to be started. He's a safer play, but I don't think he's worth locking into the lineup. In the top 40, though, you could do much worse than Travis Hunter. But outside the top 40, I did downgrade Josh Downs by 2 spots. With Alec Pierce active this week, it is still possible that Pierce is the better play beyond Michael Pittman with the Colts. Pierce was better than Downs before the concussion. So I do still rank Downs higher, but I did lower him a little bit. I am worried slightly in Alec Pierce. Beyond him, though, I upgraded 4 players by more than 10 spots, and they're still outside the top 40, so I'm probably going to bench him. But if you're in a desperate situation, if you're in DFS looking for a cheap option, I do think Kendrick Bourne has legit value. If you told me Juwan Jennings doesn't play, then Bourne would be in my top 25. I would definitely start Kendrick Bourne with much more confidence. He'd move up another 15, 20 spots. And then Ryan Flournoy, I think, could be a decent bet again with Kevontae Turpin out. He had over 100 yards last week. It's possible it happens with George Pickens on J.C. Horn. It's not as difficult of a matchup as Sauce Gardner, but it is relevant. It could be tough for Pickens. So Flournoy also has relevance, but Sterling Shepard could have a very good game. I feel like I'm kind of ranking Shepard a little bit low, to be honest. And at number 44, I did upgrade him 17 spots overall, but pretty touchdown dependent. Baker usually throws for 2 touchdowns. It could go to him, but it does feel like a bit of a gamble. Unless it was full PPR and I felt kind of desperate to start someone, I probably would keep Shepard on the bench. But Xavier Legette does move up 10 spots as well. I think his touchdown is even more likely to bet on. With no Jalen Coker coming back, then other than Ted McMillan, this matchup against Dallas is amazing, and somebody will catch passes. So Legette has scored plenty of touchdowns in his career. His horse riding celebration, I think, could be on display against the Cowboys. So all 4 of those guys do move up inside my top 45. They all move up over 10 spots collectively. But outside the top 48, I think the tier that is still kind of interesting, but probably too risky for me, I did upgrade Marvin Mims versus the Jets. I could see a big, deep shot taken to Mims, and he does have tremendous upside, but him and Troy Franklin, I think, are both hard to fully bet on. One of them, I think, will have a good game, but I don't know for sure, given Sutton's on Sauce Gardner. I think it's Franklin, but if it is Mims with a deep touchdown, wouldn't shock me at all. I see a bit more upside with Mims, but also much more variance, a safer floor with Troy Franklin. Alec Pierce moves up 6 spots now that he was cleared from his concussion. He has had some upside. Last week, Ashton Doolin filling in for him had a very good game. The week prior, A.D. Mitchell almost had a house call, if not for the fumble through the end zone. And they were running Alec Pierce's route. So he has some value, but hard to fully bet on it. Let's see what happens this week. And then with a lot of players being taken out of the rankings, I did bump up Hollywood Brown. He's inside my top 60 now. So is Luke McCaffrey. And then I did downgrade Luther Burden by 10 spots. We have not seen really anything other than one play from Burden. So even if he is more available in the offense this week, I don't know if I trust him. He's not shown you he can give you even positive yardage on a consistent basis. So those are my upgrades at wide receiver. I was sad to take out Jalen Coker from the rankings. I did think Coker could have very high appeal this week. Sadly, he is inactive. At quarterback, I only made one change, and that's bumping up Trevor Lawrence by 2 spots. He's still a very low-end super flex option. At number 18, I'm not dying to start Trevor Lawrence. I'd rather go Darnold in the same game. But with the injuries to the secondary, I do think Lawrence has a bit better connection at wide receiver this week, and I do think he's a little more effective. By 2 spots, I'd rather go Lawrence than both Bryce Young and Kyler Murray. But in case Kyler does not play, I would rank Jacoby Brissett at number 24. I'd rather go with Tua, Michael Penix, and Bryce Young above Jacoby Brissett. If you had Kyler, I would not pivot to Brissett off the waiver wire. But maybe you're desperate. Maybe you have to. I don't think I would do it, though. I would still rather go Brissett over Rattler and Joe Flacco. At 24, I guess you could do worse, but only in 2 quarterback leagues would I even consider it. At tight end, I made no changes, but I was tempted to bump up Kyle Pitts because Darnell Mooney is not going to play. And then same with Cade Otton because Chris Godwin's not going to play, but based on where I ranked them earlier, I think I'm going to stick with that ranking. They're still not inside my top 12, but inside my top 15, you could still start them if you needed a streaming option at the position. Lastly, at defense, I did change 4 of my rankings. I swapped 4 defenses in my 3rd tier. 8 through 11 is now changing. I think with the Seahawks injuries on defense in the secondary, they're not as safe. And if that's the case, maybe it's a bit more of an offensive game. I still think they're top 11, but I dropped both defenses down by 2 spots, which means the Browns and the Colts move up. And I think I'd rather go with the Browns over the Colts. The Steelers offense doesn't scare me at all. And then the Cardinals, off a weird loss, I still think could show up to play. So the Colts and Browns, I would still start. Same with the Jags and Seahawks, but they are inside my top 11 on the lower end of start territory, but still in a typical 12-team league, these are defenses I would put in my lineup. My favorite in this tier is now the Browns. That's going to be it for all of the updates in my rankings. So these are my quarterback, tight end, and defensive ranks here on the screen. Very few changes at these positions. All of the changes were pretty much outside of start consideration. Lawrence moving up 2 spots, probably irrelevant in a 1 quarterback league. But at defense, there are a little bit of changes. That's about it, though. Let's move on to my flex rankings, where I barely changed anything at running back. I'm a bit more confident in Breece Hall just because of his previous success against the Broncos. But Kamara, with his injury, loses confidence. He is much more of a 50-50 option versus Kendry Miller. I don't know exactly who's the better play, and that's why I'd rather just bench both Kamara and Kendry, but still roster them. We'll see what happens after this game. And then at receiver is where I made most of the changes. In the top 20, we do have Juwan Jennings vaulting up with Pearsall going down. Brian Thomas, a bit safer with the injuries in the Seahawks secondary. Marvin Harrison Jr. moves down 3 spots, but still a top 20 play without Kyler Murray. And then Quentin Johnston is the least safe option of the Chargers wideouts, given he's questionable this week. But in the top 30, I did upgrade Romeo Doubs. I felt like I was just too low on him earlier on. And then Zay Flowers with some questionable limited practice sessions this week. He moves down 4 spots, a bit unsafe to trust. And then Travis Hunter with a better matchup with some injuries enters the top 40. And then in the top 50, I also upgraded Kendrick Bourne, Ryan Flournoy, Sterling Shepard, and Xavier Legette, as well as Marvin Mims. They are all inside the top 50, where previously they were not. We did remove 6 players: Ricky Pearsall, Terry McLaurin, Darnell Mooney, Chris Godwin, Calvin Austin, and Jalen Coker. All of them were ranked earlier in the week, and none of them will play. So that is it for me in this video. But before I go, I do want to update one last thing. I am not going to change any of my picks against the spread, but over the week, 3 of my predictions have become easier in my favor. So I'm going to update the line to what it is currently. The Rams I had at -7.5. The line is down to -7. And if I can get a push instead of an L because of that half point, I will take it. I expect the Rams to dominate, but I will take -7 down from 7.5. I also still think the Cardinals play very competitive football. Even if it's Jacoby Brissett under center, he gets a revenge game. So I don't think the offense is that much worse without Kyler Murray. And I still think Kyler will play. So the line has gotten much easier. It is now up to 7 points in favor of Indianapolis. I will stick with Arizona to cover, but instead of 5.5, I will take the 7. So that opens the door for another push if it is a touchdown type of game, but I think Arizona will keep it closer than people think. Lastly, the line on San Francisco has also increased from 3 to +3.5. So now I can avoid the push. If it is a field goal game, give me San Francisco +3.5. I am sticking with the 3 teams I picked. So I'm not changing anything. I'm just taking the easier lines because why would I make it harder? I'm already below 500 on the year. So those are the updates. The Rams -7, the Cardinals +7, and the Niners +3.5 have entered my picks this week. Here are the 6 on the screen. I'm taking the Chiefs -1.5, as well as Chicago +4.5, and the Broncos -7. Those are my 6 picks against the spread in week 6. That's it. Finally, the video is over. I will see you next time. If you enjoyed, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. My name's Adam Riancho. I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.